The first time I saw him was in line at the Walgreens. He was dressed in red from head to toe, so I knew he wasn't from around here. He had 5 candy bars in one hand and a toothbrush in the other. I was intrigued. So he must have felt me because he turned around and he said, "Hey, how you doing?" I was like, "I'm good, how you doing?" And so, like, you know, most grand romances do, ours started with a conversation about the weather. It was July, and he said, "Is it hot enough for you?" And I was like, "Well, I mean, at least it's not snowing." You know, and he's like, "Huh, little snow doesn't bother me, I'm from Chicago." And then all of a sudden, I just heard bells like ding, 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 ding. Now, let me explain. I'd been single for about 6 or 7 years at this point. And during that time, I dated men from all kinds of exotic places: Kenya, Jamaica, Long Island. And I knew at that moment that what I needed in my life was a good old-fashioned Midwestern man, you know what I'm saying? Right, you know. I mean, this is the kind of man who put family first, the kind of man who was unimpressed with what you do, position, profile, the kind of dude that if you feed him, you fuck him, you leave him alone to watch the game, he's good. So I said, "Hey, yeah." He said, "Well, you want to maybe go outside and continue this conversation?" And so we did. We talked a little more, and he asked me if I'd be willing to go out with him that night. And I had big plans. I was planning to get myself a pedicure while I watched House of Cards on Netflix. But I was like, "All right, fine, I'll go out with you tonight, whatever. You know, I'll get a free meal." And we went out, and we had a wonderful time. I mean, we realized that we both loved traveling, we both loved eating, and most importantly, we both loved music. Music is so important to me. The only thing really that we disagreed about the whole night was Prince versus Michael Jackson. Michael, obviously, but that was okay. That was okay. I said we could continue to see each other. Now, there was only one problem, though, I have to admit. He lived 600 miles away, and I had a rule about no long-distance relationships, period. But in his defense, he did everything that he could to make sure that we saw each other on a regular basis. Like every 2 weeks, he'd just kind of pop up in DC, and we'd go out and we'd have a wonderful time. We'd eat and shop. We'd debate music like Jay-Z versus Drake, Lauryn Hill versus Erykah Badu, that kind of stuff. So it was cool. We had fun, and all was well until about 6 months in, when my best friend Lisa called and she said, "Listen," and let me just tell you about Lisa first. Lisa's the kind of girl that will tell you that you look fat in that dress, okay? This is what I'm talking about. Lisa is the girl that will actually tell you when you have a boogie hanging from your nose. She's that really honest friend. So she said, "Shawna, you know, you guys have been together for what, like 6 months now? Have you all discussed whether or not he's going to move to DC or you're going to move to Chicago?" I said, "No." She said, "Well, I think it's about that time." And she was right. It was time. Not for a talk, but for a good old-fashioned ultimatum. So the next time he came to town, right as he was about to leave, I jumped in front of the door and I said, "Look, I don't know what you think this is or what we're doing or whatever, but you are gonna have to decide. It's either you move here or I move there or we're done." And he dropped his bag, and then he grabbed my face, you know, in his hands, and he looked me right into my face and he said, "Listen, I'm coming back. I will marry your ass eventually. So for right now, I need you to chill the fuck out." I mean, who talks to Shawna Renee like that? I was taken aback and turned on. Don't judge me. So I chilled the fuck out. And about a couple weeks, he called and said, look, my sister's having a birthday party in Chicago. Would you like to come and hang out with us up there? And I was like, yes, this is it. I'm going to Chicago. I'm going to meet this family. We're going to get married. So I called my girlfriend, Lisa. I'm like, Lisa, I'm going to Chicago. She was like, okay, that's cool. I'll give you my blessing. But there's one thing you need to know. If he really, really wants you, he really likes you, he's going to pay for the whole trip. The flight, the food, everything. And I was like, okay. But see, then there's this thing, like I'm this really independent 21st century woman. I don't like depending on guys to do stuff. So I was like, how am I gonna reconcile this? So I decided to buy a one-way ticket. There. I said, he'll buy my ticket back, it'll be all right. So I get on the flight and I fly to Chicago. And we have a ball. I mean, honey, we ate our way and shopped our way through Chicago, met the family, everything was wonderful. But we hadn't really talked about whether or not this was like a thing. You know, he hadn't asked me to marry him, to move, anything. So I figured this was like the last hurrah, and I'd go home and it'd be over with. So the night before I was set to leave, I was like, look, you know, you might want to go ahead and buy him a ticket, you know, back to D.C. And he's like, oh, don't worry about it. You're good. I'll get it. Don't worry about it. So I went to bed, and that following morning, I got up. I packed all my stuff. I'm at the door, you know, the hotel. He's still laying in the bed. I'm like, so, can we go to the airport so I can go back home? And he just kind of, you know, he's not stood up. He just sort of came up to himself, and he said, you know, a friend of mine once told me that the way you really get to know somebody is to go on a road trip with them. So I'm gonna take you home. Okay, so like, we're going to drive back to DC. He's like, yeah, that's what we're gonna do. So I'm like, okay, you know, well, I guess so. I had to get back home. So we get in the car, we pack our stuff, and I guess it was probably about an hour into the ride that I mentioned to him that we were expecting some snow in DC. I just wanted him to know so that he could be prepared, you know, to stay for a little while and then come on back home. But you know, he's from Chicago. Oh, I'm not scared of a little snow. I'm like, well, but see, they're calling this thing like the Snowpocalypse. Shit, you don't snow in D.C. Okay. So we arrived in D.C. and the plan was for him to stay for about, you know, 24 hours, get some rest, and then go back home. Well, 24 hours after we arrived, it snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed. And before it was all over, there were like, I don't know, 2 feet of snow. But baby, he dug us up out of that snow like only a Chicago man could. You know what I'm saying? I was like, oh my God, this is so beautiful. So I knew, though, that it was time for him to get back home. I mean, he had a life back in D.C., and we still hadn't had any conversations about whether or not we were going to be together. So I said, okay, well, you're probably going to want to plan to leave tomorrow. And he's like, yeah, all right, no problem. Then that night, you may remember this, it snowed, and it snowed, and it snowed. And there was about 2 more feet of snow on the ground, so he was stuck. And he stayed, and he stayed, and he stayed. And we were about 3 weeks into this by this point. And I'm worried, because I'm like, don't you gonna jump? You know what I mean? Like, what are you doing? And we still haven't had a discussion about whether or not this thing was official. So I went to bed one night, woke up the next morning, and he wasn't there. I was kind of nervous, and I waited for a couple of hours, and he still wasn't there. And it was like noon, and I didn't see him. It was 3, I didn't see him. And right around 5 o'clock, he comes home, and he has this big, giant book in his hand, and he throws it down, like, on the couch next to me. And I'm like, well, what is this? And he was like, read it. I'm like, okay. employee handbook? What? Well, it turns out he did what every good Midwestern man does before he considers giving a woman his last name. Baby, he got a job. I was so excited, and I wanted to celebrate. I was like, yeah, we should go do something to celebrate. He was like, well, you know, to be honest with you, I'm hungry, I'm horny, and the game is about to come on in about 30 minutes, so. 'Cause it's a